Congress had enacted an ambitious reform program during the 1860s and 1870s, the era of Civil War and Reconstruction. After the election of President Rutherford B. Hayes and the Compromise of 1877, the national government settled into an era of stalemate and comparative inactivity. However, the causes of limited achievements and failure of politicians to address the growing problems related to industrialization and urbanization are often as instructive as periods of political achievements. The expression Gilded Age was first used by Mark Twain in 1873 as the title of a book that he wrote. He was referring to the superficial glitter of the new wealth that was so prominently displayed in the 19th century. Historians often criticize the politics of the era as more show than substance. It was the era of forgettable presidents, none of whom served 2 consecutive terms, and of politicians who largely ignored problems arising from the growth of industry in cities. The 2 major parties in these years often avoided taking stands on controversial issues. Factors accounting for the complacency and conservatism of the era included the prevailing political ideology of the time and campaign tactics of the 2 parties, and also party patronage. The idea of do-little government was in tune with 2 other popular ideas of the time, laissez-faire economics and social Darwinism. Furthermore, the federal courts narrowly interpreted the government's powers to regulate business, and this limited the impact of the few regulatory laws that Congress did pass. The closeness of the elections between 1876 and 1892 was one reason that Republicans and Democrats alike avoided taking strong positions on the issues. The Democrats won only 2 presidential contests in the Electoral College, but 4 in the popular vote. They nevertheless controlled the House of Representatives after 8 of the 10 general elections. The result was divided government in Washington, except for 2 years of the Harrison administration, when the Republicans were in control of both the presidency and the 2 houses of Congress. With elections so evenly matched, the objective was to get out the vote and not alienate voters on the issues. So election campaigns of the time were often characterized by brass bands, flags, campaign buttons, picnics, free beer, crowd-pleasing oratory. Both parties had strong organizations, the Republicans usually on the state level and the Democrats in the cities. The irony is that the issue-free campaigns brought out nearly 80% of the eligible voters for presidential elections, much higher than elections in later periods. The high turnout was a function of strong party identification and loyalty, which was often connected with the regional, religious, and ethnic ties of voters. In the North, Republican politicians kept memories of the Civil War alive during the Gilded Age by figuratively waving the bloody shirt in every campaign and reminding the millions of veterans of the Union Army that their wounds had been caused by Southern Democrats and that Abraham Lincoln had been murdered by a Democrat. The party of Lincoln, because of its anti-slavery past, kept the votes of reformers and African Americans. The core of Republican strength came from men in business and from middle-class Anglo-Saxon Protestants, many of whom supported temperance or prohibition. Republicans followed the tradition of Hamilton, and the Whigs supporting a pro-business economic program of high protective tariffs. After 1877, Democrats could count upon winning every election in the former states of the Confederacy. The solid South was indeed solidly Democratic until the mid-20th century. In the North, Democratic strength came from big city political machines and the immigrant vote. Democrats were often Catholics, Lutherans, and Jews who objected to temperance and prohibition crusades conducted by Protestant groups. Democrats of the Gilded Age argued for states' rights and limiting powers of the federal government. They're following that Jeffersonian tradition. Since neither party had an active legislative agenda, politics in this era was chiefly a game of winning elections, holding office, and providing government jobs to the party faithful. In New York, for example, Republican Senator Roscoe Conkling became a powerful leader of his party by dictating who in the Republican ranks would be appointed to lucrative jobs in the New York Customs House. Conkling and his supporters were known as the Stalwarts, while their rivals for patronage were the half-breeds, led by James G. Blaine. Who got the patronage jobs within the party became a more important issue than any policy. Republicans who did not play the patronage game were ridiculed as the mugwumps for sitting on the fence. They're mugs on one side of the fence and wumps on the other. Historians generally consider this era a low point in American politics. The administrations of Presidents Hayes, Garfield, and Arthur reflected the political stalemate and patronage problems of the Gilded Age. After being declared the winner of the disputed election of 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes's most significant act was to end Reconstruction by withdrawing the last federal troops from the South. President Hayes also attempted to reestablish honest government after the corrupt Grant administration. As temperance reformers, Hayes and his wife, Lemonade Lucy, cut off the flow of liquor in the White House. Hayes vetoed efforts to restrict Chinese immigration. Republican politicians more interested in spoils and patronage than reform were happy to honor President Hayes's pledge in 1877 to serve only one term. In the election of 1880, the Republicans compromised on the nomination of a half-breed, James A. Garfield of Ohio. Ohio was a key swing state at this time, and also stalwart Chester A. Arthur of New York as his vice president. The Democrats nominated Winfield Hancock, a former Union general who had been wounded at Gettysburg. The Garfield-Arthur ticket defeated the Democratic war hero in a very close popular vote. In his first weeks in office, Garfield was besieged in the White House by hordes of Republicans seeking some 100,000 federal jobs. Garfield's choice of half-breeds for most of his offices provoked a bitter contest with Senator Conkling and his stalwarts. While the president was preparing to board a train for a summer vacation in 1881, a deranged office seeker who identified with the stalwarts shot Garfield in the back. After an 11-week struggle, the gunshot wound proved fatal, and Chester A. Arthur then became the president. Arthur proved a much better president than people expected. He distanced himself from the stalwarts, supported a bill reforming the civil service. This bill expanded the number of government employees that were hired based on their qualifications rather than their political connections. In addition, he approved the development of a modern American Navy and began to question the high protective tariff. In 1884, the Republicans nominated Blaine for president, but Grover Cleveland ended up winning. Oops, I went ahead too far. The Democratic President Grover Cleveland was a big believer in frugal and limited government. It's kind of the tradition of Thomas Jefferson. He implemented the new civil service system and vetoed hundreds of private pension bills for those who were falsely claiming to have served or been injured in the Civil War. He signed into law the Interstate Commerce Act, which was the federal government's first effort to regulate business, and the Dawes Act, which reformers hoped would benefit American Indians. Cleveland's administration also retrieved some 81 million acres of government land from cattle ranchers and the railroads. During the 1870s and 1880s, Congress in Washington was chiefly concerned with such issues as patronage, the money supply, and the tariff issue. They left the states and local governments to deal with the growing problems of the cities and industrialization, which is going to be a big problem we'll talk about a little bit later. The most hotly debated issue of the Gilded Age was how much to expand the money supply. For the economy to grow soundly, it needed more money in circulation. However, the money question reflected the growing tension in the era between the haves and the have-nots. Debtors, farmers, and startup businesses wanted more easy or soft money in circulation. This would enable them to borrow money at lower interest rates and pay off their loans more easily with inflated dollars. After the Panic of 1873, Many Americans blamed the gold standard for restricting the money supply and causing the Depression. To expand the supply of U.S. currency, easy money advocates campaigned first for more paper money, called greenbacks, then later for the unlimited minting of silver coins. On the opposite side of the question, you've got bankers, creditors, investors, and established businesses who all stood for quote-unquote sound or hard money, meaning currency backed by gold stored in government vaults. Supporters of hard money argued that dollars backed by gold would hold their value against inflation. Holders of money understood that as the U.S. economy and population grew faster than the number of gold-backed dollars, each dollar would gain in value. As predicted, the dollar did increase in value as much as 300% between 1865 and 1895. So, eventually, those who were advocating for free silver had to deal with a Congress was constantly pushing back. Congress removed greenbacks from circulation. In addition to removing greenbacks, Congress in the 1870s also stopped the coining of silver completely. Critics called this action the crime of 1873. Then silver discoveries in Nevada revived demands for the use of silver to expand the money supply. A compromise law called the Bland-Allison Act was passed over Hayes's veto in 1878. It allowed only a limited coinage of between $2 million and $4 million worth of silver each month at the standard silver to gold ratio of 16:1. So farmers, debtors, and Western miners were really left unsatisfied by this agreement, and they continued to press for the unlimited coinage of silver. So the politics of stalemate and complacency would begin to lose their hold on the voters by the late 1880s. Discontent over government corruption, the money issue, tariffs, railroads, and trusts, it was all growing. And in response, politicians began to take small steps to respond to public concerns. But it would take a third party, called the Populists, and a major depression in 1893 to shake the Democrats and the Republicans out of their slump. Toward the end of his first term, President Cleveland created a political storm. He challenged the high protective tariff. He proposed that Congress set lower tariff rates, since there was a growing surplus in the federal treasury and the government did not need the added tax revenue. So with the tariff question, Cleveland introduced a real issue, the first in years that had truly divided Democrats and Republicans. In the election of 1888, Democrats campaigned for Cleveland and a lower tariff. Republicans campaigned for Benjamin Harrison. He's the grandson of former President William Henry Harrison. And a high tariff. The Republicans argued that a lower tariff would wreck business prosperity. They played upon this fear to raise campaign funds from big business and to rally workers in the North, whose jobs really depended on the success of U.S. industry. The Republicans also attacked Cleveland's vetoes of pension bills to bring out that veteran vote. The election was extremely close. Cleveland received more popular votes than Harrison, but ended up losing the election because Harrison's sweep of the North gained the Republican ticket a majority of votes in the Electoral College. For the next 2 years, Republicans controlled the presidency and both houses of Congress. This was really unusual for this era of close elections. The new Congress was the most active in years, passing the first billion-dollar budget in U.S. history. It enacted several different things. The McKinley Tariff. This is a tariff that raised the tax on foreign products to a peacetime high of more than 48%. It also increased monthly pensions to Civil War veterans and their widows and children as well. It passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which outlawed combinations in restraint of trade. This is going to create some problems because it doesn't actually do anything to end monopolies. This also included the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which increased the coinage of silver but still too little to satisfy farmers and miners. It also included a bill